It's hot in here. But then again, why shouldn't it be? It's time. It's all happening. Let me tell you about something that just happened to me. The backdrop to this is that I hadn't seen my son for 5 years, basically. Last year of those 5 years, we've been making some contact, and he's about to go off to college. First, I offer him, because I want to do this and because I've read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, I want to do Zen and the Art of Mercury Sables, because that's my car.
It's the All-American Road Trip.
It's the All-American Road Trip, father and son, bonding, camping, reading, talking, talk about the birds and the bees, bird by bird. We're going to do it all. We're going to go to Colorado. Now, before I talk to you about going to Colorado, let me tell you that I hate driving. Absolutely hate driving. Will not get in a car unless it's absolutely necessary. I live part of the time in Reading at this point. For me to make the choice to drive the car from Reading into Cambridge or Newton or Boston, it's a huge choice for me. I really don't like to be in a car. But here I am, my son, after first refusing the trip, and then I made other plans. I was going to go to a meditation. Could have used a meditation. So, after first refusing the trip, he begs me to take him, even though I've already made plans now. So I change my plans, thinking, I can do this. I can do this for my son. So, somewhere on the order of August 16th at about 9 a.m., we set off. First, we're going to take a day because I have a Zen sesshin. He's been to the Zen sesshin. That was one of the things we did. He did a 3-day sesshin. We're going to do a day to kind of, in my mind at least, set the time up.
What is the Zen sashimi?
The Zen, it's you're meditating, sitting and walking silently for 12 hours a day in the whole sesshin.
And you and your son Alex did that.
The plan is to do one day, just one day, and then go. So, we go there, and he's been there once, and when we first kind of got back together, so to speak, because he decided at 12 and a half that he was going to take a break from his dad. There was a funny, not so funny, but there was an internal dynamic that supported that choice. So I didn't see him for 4 years. One of the things we did was to go to a sesshin. He decided he wanted to do that. And now we're going the trip to take him to college because, long story short, he academically was very good, but socially not so good.
Do you want to talk about some of the backstory on that?
Well, the backstory, a little piece.
Give us the highlights.
Highlights are that, as many kids of his day, he's on Facebook and he's on this and that and talking about what he does. So he dropped out of high school, Newton North, at the beginning of his junior year. It was academically not challenging, he said, and he didn't have any friends, and he didn't like what was going on for him. He decided he'd get his GED. Now, he wanted to get his GED and then go off to college. So he applied to a couple of places, didn't get in, but he did get into Naropa University, which is a school started by Trungpa Rinpoche in the 1970s. And they accepted him, seemed like a fit of sorts. So he did get in there. In the meanwhile, he decided kind of a year later that, or actually at the end of the year, in May of what would have been his junior year, that he'd like to come to the school and just kind of make amends in his mind.
His high school.
His high school, yeah. And so he wrote to the housemaster and said he was going to come and that he'd like to talk to the student body for 2 or 3 minutes and say what his journey had been, and to kind of make amends was his thought.
That didn't go as planned, right?
That did not go as planned. The housemaster got his thing. At first he was friendly enough, but said that no, he couldn't speak. And so there was another interaction, and then turns out the housemaster told him not only couldn't he speak, but he couldn't come to this Newton North end of year it's kind of a graduate kind of thing. And so...
He didn't graduate.
Right, he didn't graduate.
Therefore, he wasn't invited to the graduation. Is that basically what it was?
Well, it was an end of year thing, and they have a school like...
I'll help you with that.
They have an election for school officers. I don't think it's a graduation thing. I'm not completely clear.
Okay. So anyway, so he asked to be invited and address the school body. They said no. They said you can't even go. And
then he posted something on Facebook, which I never even saw it, but evidently it made reference, because he lives in Newton, it made reference to New Town. And at this point in the history of our country, that kind of a joke can get you in trouble.
And it did, correct?
And it did. The police were at his house. It was a Sturm und Drang.
What does that mean?
Sturm und Drang is the German equivalent of the perfect storm. It was a conglomeration of circumstances that made it so. Wound up, the school got a restraining order. It was unpleasant. Okay. Let me just say that. So that all happened. There were other things that happened. It was a difficult time, as it were. So this getting into Naropa was a very significant thing for him. And I thought that even though I've never driven cross country, I've driven, but not 2,000 miles.
Have you driven for work or for pleasure?
Mostly pleasure, mostly. We'll talk about that later, Brian.
Okay.
and I don't drive, but I just decided that it was important enough for bonding.
Okay.
Thought, okay, this is set up. The thing I was going to do was go to this Zen meditation. So he's done it once before, he'll come. So we head off August 16th to the session. And we get there, and things are different, I realize right away. He cannot sit still. He cannot kind of get with the program. It becomes really clear really quickly that he is a disruptive force because a Zen sesshin is very prescribed. It's a very contained structure so that you know what's happening, so that you give into it, and hopefully your mind is then liberated to do deeper exploration. That's the theory, anyhow.
So your son was not giving in to the process?
He was not giving into the process.
Would it be fair to say he was trying to engage perhaps his own process?
Absolutely. He was trying to engage his own process, which upset me. Let me just say that. It upset me. Because this is a place I've gone to myself for 15 years or so. And so I have a relationship to all of this. So we get there about 11 o'clock. By 2 o'clock, it's pretty clear to me that this isn't going to work. We're only going to stay for a day, but it's not even going to work for that.
Okay.
So I kind of talked to the person in charge and basically suggest that we'll leave at 5. So this is totally different from the plan that I had originally had, and I'm in a bad mood.
You're not usually in a bad mood, I've noticed.
Right.
So it's unusual for you to be in a bad mood, and this was an unusual situation on top of
Yes. And so it's 5 o'clock, and it was unworkable. And I just took him and we went. And of course, the very first thing we did was get lost. There's nothing I hate more than getting lost.
You didn't have a GPS?
I didn't have a GPS. So we did what we did, and eventually we made it to the Interstate 90, Mass Pike. Now the interstate, come to find out, is what death looks like when you're still alive.
Are you referring to a traffic jam?
No traffic jams, but it is so sterile an environment. It could only have been put together by the same people who built Abu Ghraib. It has that same kind of, that interminable quality, that sense that you need to stay between the lines. Literally. Or else you're going to be flatlining. Because there are these huge 16-wheel Dharma trucks that spin the wheel of Dharma for you. And it's a terrible Dharma. It's monotonous. You get off at a rest area and they have these huge sodium lights. You feel like you're in a prison yard. That everything is, night is day and day is night. Halogen lights, sodium lights. You go inside and you approach the American food desert. there is nothing natural there. There's maybe an apple or a banana you can buy, but other than that, it's all packaged and processed.
No hummus and couscous there?
Hummus and couscous are like invading Syria. It has that kind. It's that far away.
Is hummus verboten?
Hummus verboten. Arbeit macht frei.
And with that,
French fry.
and with
Arbeit macht French fry. So, there we were. In the middle, finally in the middle, of the turnpike. The food desert. The killing fields.
did you eat a slice of Sparrow pizza?
I did not. Sparrow pizza, McDonald's. The thing, it was such a food desert that I was even excited when I saw a Starbucks. But, I didn't know this, but just goes to show you what happens is that these Starbucks, they're not even real Starbucks. They're licensed by Starbucks. And you don't get, at Starbucks, you get a refill for 50 cents. But you don't get the refill at these places.
It's a world gone mad.
And when I found that out, I was so outraged. I got the manager, and I got her to write down that she wasn't giving me a refill, and I'm going to write to Howie Schultz myself.
Are you kidding me?
I'm going to write to Howie myself.
You asked for the manager.
I did. I asked for the manager, and I said, this is the Starbucks. Starbucks does this. And then she says, well, if you read the fine print, we're just licensed, and we use all their stuff, but
Can't
we're
tell
not
by the
really.
signs. Can't tell by the signs.
You cannot tell by the signs. They're stubborn. And what's odd, and this was actually quite exciting, Starbucks has a particular kind of lighting. It's kind of mellow lighting. And even though this is kind of open, so it's kind of weird. You have this kind of mellow lighting, but all around, because it's open space, it's one of these food court type places, all around is this like heavy neon lights and the halogen lights, and so you're in this like low light place in the middle of this high light place. And it was all like that. It was all weird. It was all surreal. I felt like I was in a Bardo state the whole time I was on the interstate. And in fact, I thought, I'm really a person who's interested in equal justice. And I was thinking that the real punishment for all these bankers who cheated and lied and did illegal things is they should have to drive on the interstate back and forth, just go back and forth.
Some people like that.
That's what I told him.
That's exactly what she told me. But I think that the thing is you'd have to drive the speed limit. That would drive them crazy. And if they got too above or too below the speed limit, the NSA, which has direct keystroke relationship with you, could give you an electric shock. So you'd have to like drive back and forth across the country, and every time you got below or above 5 miles past the speed limit, you'd get this little electric shock.
That's great. Let's focus back on the trip.
You don't think this is a great idea? I thought this was a great idea. I was really excited when I had that idea.
It's a great idea for another day.
For another
We gotta
day.
focus. Like a laser.
So there we were. We were traveling first the Mass Pike, and then the New York Pike, and then the Ohio Pike, and I must have missed some pike, Michigan maybe pike. But they were all endless. They were all totally endless. You would get on and it would say 392 miles to Buffalo. And then you get to Buffalo and it would say 322 miles to South Bend. And then 602 miles to Omaha. By the time you add up all these miles, it was driving me crazy.
It's in the thousands, I bet.
Thousands. It was 2,000 miles to Boulder. Ugh. And not only that, but when you get out in the west, to Nebraska and Colorado and those places, the speed limit is 75 miles an hour. And I'm an old man. I never drive 75 miles an hour. I drive 65 and then look behind me to make sure that the cops aren't coming. But I had to drive 65 and make sure the 16-wheelers, they would come right up behind you and flash their lights.
They weren't flashing lights to say hi?
I don't think so. I don't think so. So what I had to do was find out of every 20 of these 16-wheelers, there was one that was going the speed limit. I had to find that one, and then for 300 miles, go right behind it, so they'd leave me alone.
So how are you and your son getting along on this trip so far?
Well, the beginning it was okay. The beginning was okay. I told him we had agreed that I was going to make the rules of the car. I could play whatever music I wanted, and that since I was doing all the driving, that it was going to be organized to help me do the driving.
Okay.
And at the beginning, he was okay with that. And we read this book called Teammates, which was good because he's a Red Sox fan, and I had picked it out from the library special. It was about a road trip, actually, that taken to see by Bobby Dorr and Johnny Pesky and Dom DiMaggio to see the dying Ted Williams.
Okay.
It was the last road trip. And it was fun. It was actually fun. Talked about the Red Sox in the 40s, and it was nostalgic. It talked about what baseball was like when the players weren't getting paid $1 gazillion. And
So in that moment, in those moments, did you feel as if there was some normalcy to your relationship with your son?
yeah, it felt like, and he asked me some questions. He asked me, I remember the most important question I thought was, he asked me what was it that made a person an adult? I thought that was a good question. I thought that was interesting. So we read this Teammates book. It was fun. I had asked him, because I've been having sciatica. So the last thing you want to do if you've been having sciatica is drive for 2,000 miles. So I asked him at the end of a day's drive, when we found a place to camp, to massage my leg a little bit, and it helped. So the first couple of days were pretty good. It was okay. I developed this strategy. We would start the day with Om, and he would do 3 ohms, and I would do a half hour of oming, and it set me up good. I felt good while I was oming. I felt like I can do this. I can make this. I can make this into a practice. That's what I thought. In order to survive this, I'm going to have to make this into a practice. So I did that, and I did this other exercise called Sat Kriya, which goes Sat, Nam, Sat, Nam, Sat, Nam. That was harder to do.
What is that supposed to accomplish?
Well, it supposedly brings the energy, the Kundalini energy, because this comes from when I used to live in the Kundalini Yoga ashram many, many years ago. It brings the energy up from the base of the spine, up the whole spine, to the top of the head, and then the energy, then you direct the energy back down to the root chakra. So basically, you're circulating and building your chi, supposedly, till you start dropping dishes and breaking shit. But you can just do whatever, you just work with what's happening.
So anyway,
Even if it's bells and whistles from wherever, because that's what would happen. You'd go, because we went to a lot of these, we stopped a couple times to sleep when I got tired, had to sleep. We would stop in these rest areas, and you would go, and it'd be quiet, secluded. But then, after a couple of hours, you'd be woken up by these huge trucks that kind of basically spend some part of the night there. But they don't just spend the night there. They have these huge generators. And these generators actually vibrate the ground. So I would wake up in the middle of this, invariably, in the middle of this nightmare about, because it felt like the night of the living dead. It was that kind of, it kind of makes your stomach uneasy, and I wasn't eating much anyhow because we were in a food desert. So, and it was 40 days and 40 nights, it felt like. And so these trucks would go, and it would wake me up, and I would be sort of neither here nor there at 3, 4 in the morning driving. Kind of, it was the most bizarre experience I ever had. And I've done it before. When I was in college, I hitchhiked across the country, but I wasn't doing the driving then. And this was so unpleasant. Each day I would wake up and I would think to myself, this is the gift I'm giving my son. I'm doing this. I'm doing this. This is the last thing in the world I would do if I were deciding for myself. But I'm going to do this. I'm just going to give over what I want, what I would do for myself, and do this for him.
do you think your son appreciated the effort you were putting forth?
No, I do not.
Can you give me some examples?
Well, as the trip went on and he got more agitated, and at a certain point, even though we'd agreed that he was going to read, and we were going to pass the time that way, that I brought some things to listen to, some cassettes to listen to, but he just, after about 3 days, he just wouldn't do it anymore. He just went on strike.
What was he doing to go on strike if he was in the car with you?
He was just sitting there not doing what I asked him to do. And so it got snippety then. Because I felt like, this was what you could do. This was how you keep up your end. But whatever was going on in his head, he just got whatever he got. But he stopped doing that to the point where he refused to read, and roundabout South Bend, I said, well, if you don't want to do that, that was the deal, you can take the bus from Chicago there.
Do you think that statement was meant to be provocative?
Well, I wanted him to do what he said he was going to do. But he just said, okay. So I actually drove him into Chicago. 3 bleeping hours out of my way. Because I thought, okay, 1,000 miles, I made that. He'll take the bus if that's what he wants to do. So I took him into Chicago, and he immediately he like freaked out. There'd just been just my luck. There'd just been a shooting on the north side of Chicago, so there were cops everywhere and neighborhood volunteers in these yellow vests, and these people freaked him out. He was just freaked out by it, and I I we went into the loop, and I sent him in because I had to stay with the car to find out the bus schedule and what was going to happen. So he goes in, and he gets involved with this street person who was in the Union Station there. Winds up giving him $9 or something for God knows what. And it was just, it blew my mind. It just blew my mind that he was so unsavvy in an urban environment. And so the bus was going to be in the morning, so we basically found a city street in Chicago and parked and well, was gonna sleep. I didn't sleep a wink all night. Not a single wink.
How come you didn't look for like a motel or something?
I didn't, I'd done all the driving. I hardly knew where I was. I didn't know how to get to where I was going. It had taken a lot to get to the loop, and I just wanted to stay close to where he was going to be leaving from.
Okay.
Turns out, close to where he's leaving from is the West Side, which is the worst part of Chicago. It's like it goes from the loop, and all of a sudden you're in Blade Runner territory. It's like you're in Blade Runner territory, and people do not look like they want to help you out. Look like they're really taking care of themselves, and they don't want to be approached. And so we drove around. We drove a little bit out of that part, and then we go into this. He wants to go to a restaurant, so we go to this cantina because there's no decent food anywhere.
Did you find a Whole Foods nearby?
There were Brian, you should go back to North Georgia. North Georgia is the place for you. Fried chicken and waffles is you would have been very happy in Chicago.
So you and your son went to this restaurant,
Cantina. And it could have been if I had slept and I wasn't pissed off and he wasn't pissed off, could have been a sweet thing. There were guitarists, they were playing serenades, and it was a sort of ethnic place. We were the only English speakers there, I think. And so I ordered the fish soup. And the fish soup had like these things in shells. It was all shells, and you had to break it open and get it out. It was just too much. I was just beside myself. And so we get in the morning, and by the morning it's like he wants to get something to eat, so we walk, and then we get into this argument about history, about what I should do for him, about what it means to be his father and what his demands are.
This is the deep conversation that was probably building up over the years, so that you had not spent with him.
Yeah, it wasn't a deep conversation. It was mostly a series of accusations. And it was like the third degree. Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? And I wasn't having any of it. And I just, because he's big. He's like 6'3", 210. And he can loom over you. And so the only way I can deal with him really is to get crazier than he gets. So we were having this kind of back and forth as we were walking through Jacob Riis Park, which was strewn with trash and stuff. But it was a nice park. And so then he talks to his mother, and he makes a couple of calls because he wants to get a place to stay when he arrives because he'll be there a day early or something. So he comes back. All of a sudden, that's all off because no one offered him a place to stay or to pick him up in Denver or whatever. That's all off. Now he's demanding that I drive him.
How are you receiving that news?
It felt like when you're sitting there with your trial and all of a sudden the judge says you're going to get the electric chair. That's what it felt like. It felt like, oh, this was really hard driving to Chicago, and I'm totally spent, and I'm glad I can finally go home, and it was a bad idea anyhow. And all of a sudden, now this is like straight driving from Chicago to Boulder, Colorado, and I can't leave him there because I've seen how he acts in the city, and now because we had an interaction with a cop too, and he was freaked out by that.
What was that about? What happened with the cop?
Just the cop pulled up next to where we were, and just he had nothing to do except hassle people. So he just started to hassle a little bit and asked for identification. And Alexander responded like, oh, he was doing something illegal, which he probably was, but it's probably not the best thing to tell him he's doing something illegal. So that got him pissed, the cop, I mean now. And of course, that kind of freaked my son. And so after that, he thought there was kind of a conspiracy that they were after us. And so he didn't want to stay in Chicago. He didn't want to be in Chicago. He wanted to drive. So what I realized was, because I had some second thoughts myself and felt like, oh, I said I was going to drive him. I should really do it. But we were at loggerheads, and I wanted him to give a little, but he doesn't play give a little. So it was horrible. It was just horrible.
So you're on your way to Denver again.
Denver again.
Any other notable events?
Notable events. Oh my God. It was bad. It got a little better, a little whatever. But we're supposed to be there Wednesday morning at 9 o'clock. He's supposed to move in. At 8 o'clock, we're about half hour away. I don't know what was going on for him, but we were not getting along very well.
I heard there was an incident with the car keys.
Yes, that's what I'm telling you about. So he wants me to stop the car. We're half hour away. I say, I'll stop in Boulder when we get there. He wants to eat something. So there's nothing to eat anyhow, so I figure it's a half hour. I've waited for 4 days. Mm-hmm. But he wants to stop the car, And then he opens the door while I'm driving. So I have to stop the car. Then we get into this. It's like, it was crazy. It was just crazy. And then he gets out of the car and starts walking on the highway. So I think it's 90 degrees out. Sun is whatever. Has no water, no hat. So fair-skinned. I figured he'll be back. I wait for 45 minutes. He doesn't come back. So this is already this is like driving me crazy now. Now I'm just going om, 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 and I just said to myself, this is exactly what I deserve. This is enlightenment for me. This is what enlightenment's like on a bad day. And so at a certain point, I got back in the car and looked for him, and I didn't see him. And I thought, no, something else has happened. And so finally I stopped. Then I thought, I'll go a little further. And sure enough, a little further, there he was. So then it became a thing of stopping and waving to him and talking to him a little bit. He walked past. Then he got in the car. He starts to grab my car keys. So we're struggling, and it was a nightmare. And I say to him, because he's talking about he wants to have his own experience. So I say, well, get to Boulder and you can have your own experience, whatever. But he's wherever he is. And so he won't get in the car, so then I let him walk some more. Then I drive ahead of him and sort of wait for him. And so engage him in a conversation. And basically, he wanted total control.
Do you think he was thriving on the tension between you two?
You know, I was so focused on keeping my own bleeping sanity that I didn't have enough space to think about what was happening for him. I mean, something was going on where it was important enough for him to win, that whatever winning meant, that superseded any previous goals. And that was sad for me. That gave me to believe that that's not a real good way to start your college career. So finally he got in the back seat. I told him he could touch me because that was part of the trip, that I didn't want him to touch me unless I invited the touch. And he had done that. And so
let's pause. What are you talking about?
Well, I mean, like grab something from me or push me or
break your personal space.
Yeah.
Okay.
So so he had done that, and finally he said he'd sit in the back seat. So we kind of worked out something where we would stop. We wouldn't say a word, and we'd stop at the outskirts of Boulder because he didn't want to go to Boulder. So anyhow, I figured I had to get him there because I was 30 minutes away.
So
I'd driven the whole way. I had to at least get him there. It was a grace, by the grace of God, that a cop didn't stop him on the highway that he was on, because that would have been enough. It was like, it was crazy. And so we got to Boulder, fortunately without incident, and fortunately we actually got into Boulder, and fortunately where we actually did stop, because he wanted something to eat again, was a Safeway that was like close to where we needed to be. So, and that then became a whole other saga about getting him there with the stuff he needed and meeting his mother, my ex-wife, and kind of just managing the crisis. And so I stayed there another 2 days for the kind of orienting stuff for parents, and they do these things. And it was poignant for me. It was sad because we were there, we'd done it, but it hadn't been the trip that I had fantasized in my head. And so it just, I had this profound sadness. Not only that, but I had a profound sadness and a four days driving to do on my own on the way back. And so I'm kind of still kind of on the interstate.
mental
Uh-huh. It's just like this, it was so barren of human contact and of any meeting of anything healthy or useful or anything that you could say, oh, there's something good happening here.
You
It
feel like
was-
the world's largest ball of yarn.
It was like hell. It was like hell, and the car was the handbasket.
How did it go meeting his mother at college?
That actually went well, because in crisis mode, it was okay, and he treats her the same way.
Do you think because you had the experience with him, all the negative experiences on the way up, that when you finally met his mother there, you were so prepared mentally for bad things that you were better able to handle being around his mother? Or
Well, I think all those ohms helped. In fact, I'm still doing them.
So how was the trip back?
It sucked. It was terrible. It was the interstate. I got stopped for driving too slow. Getting out in traffic, you have to zoom out at 70 miles an hour. I never heard of such a thing. I reminded myself, I remember when I was growing up and my parents drive, sometimes you would see on Sundays, you would see these old people out, and they would be driving so slow that there would be a danger. That's who I was embodying.
Yep. So then you made it back in one piece.
I made it back in one piece, and the car did not break down. I am so grateful to my mother for giving me that car, and for that car not breaking down, and for Long Life Auto having tuned it up right before I left.
Can you imagine the trip if that car would have broken?
Oh, there were a couple of times when I thought it was breaking down. There was 3 o'clock in the morning, I remember, in Colorado, in the middle of no fucking where. that all of a sudden I thought I had a flat tire. Well, it turned out that the road surface was uneven. But I all of a sudden I was driving, I was kind of in that sort of resentful driving state that you get in at 3 in the morning when you've had way more than enough. And all of a sudden I was catapulted into this other reality. Just, I could imagine myself by the side of the road in Colorado, everybody going by at 75 miles an hour.
Well, thankfully that didn't happen.
Thankfully that didn't happen. So it could have been worse. That's what I keep telling myself. And that's the upside.
It could have been worse. Well, that's good. So, any parting lessons from this little story? Or?
Well, I think 10 years from now, I'll feel good about myself for having shown up. I did what I had to do. It was the most unpleasant thing I've ever done. Bar maybe being tortured at Abu Ghraib or something,
Right.
which didn't happen to me.
Let's leave things on a positive note. Can you think of something fun that you guys talked about on the trip?
Well, the positive note was that I have a 36 Lamed Vavniks, sort of people. I would not have survived if I hadn't been able to call people who know me over many years and could listen to the particular piece of the story that I was in. And so it was an appreciation of friendship, that when things aren't going well, those people who you've built up over the years, they sustain you. That I really felt grateful to the people who are part of kind of that inner circle that I could talk to. And I talked to several of them. And